Oculus tells the story of siblings Kaylee and Tim and how they get a hold of a particular mirror. And this mirror is significant in their lives because 11 years earlier, it caused their parents to become rather possessed and in fact led to the death of their parents. And now Kaylee, who's a believer in the supernatural element of the mirror, wants to try and prove her father's innocence. And at the same time, Tim, who's more of a skeptic, in fact, is trying to convince Kaylee that the mirror does not possess such powers. And through this back and forth between these two characters, you understand a lot more about them as people. It's not just about skeptics versus believers at this point. It's more so about dread and regret after a point. This film, Oculus, is not at all about the gore or even the horror factor to a certain extent, which it certainly does possess, but its primary focus is about the past, about facing your demons, and about a lot of other themes and elements, about how your past comes to haunt you in so many different ways, which is why I certainly believe that Oculus is not only a different kind of horror film, but definitely a great one. The lead up of the film doesn't necessarily focus on the supernatural and horror element of the mirror, rather it focuses on the characters of Kaylee and Tim, which is something I really liked. It makes you care about them and completely understand their extremely well fleshed out motivation for doing this. Because in most horror films nowadays, you see random teenagers experimenting, trying to have fun, just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. But in this particular case, you understand the motivation of why they're there and why they're doing what they're doing, of course. And it's really believable, and it really actually engages you to what's going on, and it really makes you feel for the characters to a certain extent. I have to say that the film is certainly cleverly crafted. The thing is, the past and the present storylines, they almost run parallel to one another towards the final act of this film, and that adds to the horror element, adding to some beautiful editing as well. But really, it makes the film all the more intense and extremely intricately done, and when the characters in the film are being tricked by the mirror, at the same time the viewer of the film itself is being tricked by the film, and you're trying to figure a lot of things out here and there, but at the same time you're almost enjoying this extremely intense journey that you're on. One that I think I haven't really experienced before. Of course, adding to all of this, the performances in the film certainly are great. Katie Sackhoff, in my opinion, personally stood out. She definitely has the most to do in this film from a character's perspective, and she really does a good job at it. And there's one key element that I think a lot of horror films in the past have kind of forgotten or have kind of almost overused at times. It needs to be balanced. That is the musical score. Certain horror films forget about the musical score, find no need for it. Other horror films, in fact, use their musical score to add to the horror of the film by having extremely loud and screeching scores. But really, what Oculus did right with the musical score is that it blends in absolutely perfectly in certain moments. It's subtle, repeating the same notes over and over again to trigger similar emotions that you felt in the past moments of the film. Really was a smart thing done by the composer itself, and I have to say that the musical score, while it does add a lot to the film, it blends in well and really replenishes the tone of the film. And it's a film that I actually had to sit down and think about for a while, which makes it one of the most intelligent horror films I've perhaps ever seen. It's a film that made me think and kind of ponder over what the end and the general message of the film was. And as I thought about it, while it isn't entirely fleshed out, and I felt at the end they were trying to go for a slightly more different ending, at the same time, this story that Oculus is portraying is one about clinging on to the past. You can't always cling on to the past. It will actually come back and hurt you in a certain way. And at the same time, the slightly negative aspect of it with relation to your past, of course, is that your past will always haunt you. And it's almost a way of saying not to commit certain actions, but it kind of goes against what certain characters did in the film. And the ending of the film is a little confusing what it's trying to say. I think it tried to get a little bit ahead of itself in the sense that it was trying to leave it up to your interpretation, which it certainly does to a certain extent. But at the same time, it doesn't give you enough to work with. It's very out in the open. And if there is a derivable message from it, if there's a definite message, it's certainly one that I have not observed. But if there is a certain message that can be derived, and that one that I have derived, it isn't entirely positive, but it's still relatively in tandem with what the film is trying to say. Nonetheless, Oculus to me was definitely an amazing film with some great performances, a fantastic musical score, a well-edited film, a horror film that made me think for once, something I have not seen in a very, very long time. And I'm going to give Oculus a double yes.